So let's get into some of the basics here. So when you're dealing with any programming language, you want to learn about its syntax, you want to learn about its core fundamentals. So with Python, some of the core fundamentals, as I mentioned, would include user inputs, variables, conditional statements, and control structures. So the first being the user inputs. Now, what is a user input? It is exactly as it sounds. You're acquiring an input from a user, right? So you're going to develop some basic program to accept some input, and based on the input, you're either going to process something or you're going to send it throughout the flow of your code and ultimately achieve some output. So in Python, user inputs can be obtained using the input function, as you can see there, okay? So what the input function does is it accepts a prompt as an argument, okay? And we'll talk more about arguments in programming later, but essentially it's like basically a placeholder. It's something that it is waiting for to process. So it accepts the argument and then waits for the user to enter in some kind of data. Now, from a ChatGPT perspective, if you wanted to send in a prompt and you wanted Python to do the work for you, right? When it comes to, for instance, establishing some kind of user input algorithm or code snippet. Well, what you would do is you could do something as simple as this. So you can send in a prompt that says, provide Python code for a program that prompts the user to enter their name and then prints a personalized greeting, okay? So that's what you see on the bottom here. So the user inputs example, you're basically accepting in with the variable called name, you're accepting an input, and within the input function here, as you can see in the parentheses, it states enter your name. Now that's exactly what the user is going to be prompted with, and hence that's why it's a user input. And then the print statement is going to do exactly that. It's going to print it as an output, and it's going to say hello plus the name being whatever name they entered in as their name. Okay, so this is just a very basic user input example, and we have sections in this entire, or rather, we have lectures and demos in this entire section that will go through multiple examples and how to use AI guidance for Python programming in your IDE or your idle shell. Okay, now if you look on the top here real quick, just to kind of skim back, think of this as sort of like the syntax of the input statement. So you want to get a user input with a prompt, right? And you would do that by establishing some kind of variable, and you would set it as an assignment. So you would use the assignment operator, and you would accept some kind of input using the input function. So this is sort of how the syntax looks like using the input function. And then ultimately, once you accept the input, you would print as we saw in the example on the bottom there. So print you entered, comma, some user input. In the case down here, we did some concatenation, which is just adding strings together, which again, we'll talk more about. But that's just a brief intro to the fundamentals of user inputs. Now, when it comes to variables, we did briefly look at a variable in the previous slide when we talked about name. So name was a variable there, but a variable essentially is just like a placeholder. You could think of it that way, or specifically it's a name given to a memory location that stores data. So think of, you give a name to something and that specific name carries some data, okay? And that data is kept in memory, okay? So every time you call that name or reference that name, it's essentially now a variable and it's assigned to that stored data, if that makes sense. Okay, so variables, they act as a reference to the stored value. So I think it's a really easy way to think of it. So it's a reference to a stored value. Now, using ChatGPT or AI guidance, just as an overview, if you wanted Python code given to you by ChatGPT, you can simply craft a nice little message there and say, give me Python code examples demonstrating the use of variables to store an age, height, and a message. Okay, so we're asking ChatGPT for three things there. We're asking it for variables to store an age, height, and a message, sort of like a personalized message. Okay, And that's the example you see here on the bottom. So variables example, you can see age is a variable here, okay? Age, we're setting it equal to 25. That's called a hard-coded value. So 25 is the hard-coded constant to this variable. Height is the second variable here, and it's set to 1.75. And then message is the third variable, and that's now a string, which is Python is amazing, okay? And you can see that that's in single quotes because it is a string, and that goes with Python syntax. So the first two variables are integers, and then the bottom one here, the message, is a string variable, okay? And on the top here is just basically, again, another example, x is equal to 10. So here x is the variable and it stores the value 10, okay? So this value 10 gets stored in x, just like this value 25 gets stored in age, 1.75 gets stored in height. Python is amazing, gets stored in message. So anytime you call any of these variables, it will give you that stored data